Good morning. It's 6:31. The temperature is 14 degrees. I'm Amy Powell.
I'm Gil Amundson, in for KARE King.
His voice and face have spanned the decades, but breaking into television was somewhat of a fluke for Gil. Maybe all those old hits he used to spend during his 3 years at KMHL Radio in Marshall helped his job security. Or his poetry reading show, when lovelorn female listeners hung on every romantic word Gil uttered. Or maybe it was the years he spent in Duluth at WDSM TV. Whatever the reason, Gil traveled back home to the Twin Cities with 6 years of broadcast experience under his belt. With help from an old friend and a little luck, Gil landed himself a job at Channel 11 in 1960. Casey Jones was the friend, and the job he told Gil about was reading the noon news on radio. Gil had almost given up on TV, thinking a job in sales was his calling, but Gil never managed the hard sell. When Gil showed up for his interview, management had decided against filling the anchor slot. But for some unknown or forgotten reason, the news writer walked off the job not more than an hour before Gil walked in. Was it an omen? Either way, Gil was hired here at Channel 11, then WTCN, and his career has not only spanned the generations, but also the latter. Gil started as a radio news writer, then radio reporter, TV nighttime film editor, reporter, and then finally, he was the boss, news director.
Gil Amundson anchors the 9:30 news, and a rarity these days, writes and edits his own scripts.
Finding and working with someone as talented and experienced as Gil certainly is a rarity, and his dedication to the station has never slackened. He knows how a newsroom works.
You first or me? You go first. All right. You ready? Run or fly.
His news decision-making process was fine-tuned over the years with every job he's done. He learned the ropes out in the field, covering state fairs, elections, telethons, and meeting some pretty famous people. Then President Ford, Madame Sadat, St. Paul Mayor George Latimer, and even Robert Wagner, who somehow managed to turn the table on old Gil and ask a few questions himself. But no matter who he's interviewing or where he's going, Gil has never had to wait for anything during his career.
I suspect that if you're waiting for a bus, you'll grab the first one that comes along. But should that be a bus be one that thinks it's
His command of the business is amazing. Some say Gil's always been the skipper of the newsroom. But throughout his television career, Gil's always had time to be dad and husband, making sure no matter what wacky schedule he was working, that he would have time to spend with his family, especially when it meant putting on those favorite fishing shoes and casting a line. Maybe going fishing was the only instance Gil actually enjoyed waking up early.
I'm Gil Amundson. This is my boy Scott. We're going fishing. We'd like to show you some reasons why you should too.
But after a while, all those years in a newsroom, drinking down pots of coffee and sitting around waiting for news to happen, must have taken their toll.
She has freckles on her butt. She is nice. Gilbert, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun.
What was that? Gil belching? And after 30 years, that's the only dirt we can find on Gil. Gil Amundson has been an inspiration to many over the years, giving young reporters their first break in the business, always offering solid advice, and putting a smile on everyone's face, even in the worst of times. But perhaps Gil's magic, talent, and personality are best described by those who've shared his life.
Even the first day we met, Gil, was very, very amusing, I thought. Anyway, I think you found it rather tragic. I arrived in Minneapolis. I'd never met you before. You were my new news director. And I had, knowing the guys at the airport in Fort Myers, which was my last job, convinced them to basically take every single one of my worldly possessions and put them on the plane with me without charging me extra baggage, because I was always doing stories at the airport. So you arrived at the airport to pick me up, and I met you, and we took one bag, and you said, "Is that it?" I said, "No, there's a little more, Mr. Amundson. We have a few more bags." Well, about 45 more bags arrived. like too many to fit in your car, and then you got into a fight with a porter who accused you of like ripping him off and not tipping him enough, and it was a very not a great way to start a new job, that's for sure.
It seems like a long time ago that you first hired me, and one of the first things we had to do when I came here was you and Dick Modig and I had to find some way to fit all those little tiny desks in that little tiny newsroom. Somehow we managed to do it, but there certainly wasn't any first-class leg room. In that first year, too, that winter of 79, 80, you remember how cold it was, and it was one of the worst winters in Minnesota history. We'd hired all those people, many of whom had come from the South, and they walked in here and they didn't know what hit them. Their cars didn't start, and they didn't have any warm clothes. Seems like a long time ago. It was 11 years, actually. So now you can have a happy retirement, you can fish and golf, and have your travels with Cheryl.
I hope I get this even here. I think that should just about do it. It's warm. Oh. Gil, it's days like these out here in Arizona that I wonder how the hell you ever got me to leave here and come to Minnesota in the dead of winter. You were some kind of bullshit artist. I had the last laugh, though. I'm back here, and now that you're retiring, maybe you can come out here and visit me. We have an extra room in the house. Our winter rates are, well, they're reasonable. Good luck, Gil. Nice working for you.
Gil, hello from Boston. What's all this I hear about your retirement? I mean, how could you possibly be retiring? If I'm only 16, then the oldest you could be is 23, and who retires at the age of 23? You know, they asked me to remember a funny story about you, and while I can't remember a funny one, I do remember something that happened a few years ago when Jim Gately, Jane Mitchell, now those names take you back, don't they? And I were in the newsroom arguing over something as serious as who was going to use the electric typewriter that day. Well, you strode in and came up to us and said, you know, kids, the only important thing for you to remember about being a good reporter is that you have to do 3 things. You have to work as hard as you can, you have to remember to always tell the truth, and you have to have a good time, because the only way you do your best job is when you're having a good time. That hasn't been a bad creed to live by, and I've never forgotten it. So Gil, when you pick up those golf clubs and your fishing rod, I want you to go out there and do your best. Have a great time and a great retirement.
Well, Gil, look at it this way. At least you won't have to look at me dragging myself in here every morning with ball cap on, hair out of place when I come in to do the radio show, and I always walk up to you and say, Gil, how many days do you have left? Well, first of all, you've run the race, the marathon. You've run it well with honor and dignity. And not only that, you're a nice guy. I mean, you know, something is wrong here. But I think I speak for all of us when I say that we're going to miss you as a person, miss your integrity, and just miss having you around, because you are as much a part of Channel 11 as anything I can think. So as you head off to that golf course and take that big backswing and the drive straight down the middle, and you think about us once in a while, realize that there are a lot of us thinking about you. And remember, you won't have to look at me every morning. Have a great retirement, pal.
Gil Amundson. Hi, it's Jane Velez Mitchell. And here I am in Hollywood. And you can see, if you pull out, that Hollywood is still up to its old tricks, and I'm not even outside at this point because it's raining. But funny stories. God, there are so many funny stories that I remember, but I have to censor myself. I don't know how many I can tell because I don't know what kind of group is going to be listening and watching this tape. Well, funny stories. There was a time that I walked across the street and almost died because I found out, being from New York, people don't walk in Minneapolis, and I walked into a drainage ditch, and it was snowing, and I went completely under my head. I was completely over my head in snow, and I literally almost drowned. That was my first attempt to walk across the street in Minneapolis, and when I crawled out, people asked me what happened, and I told them, and they were just incredulous. They were like, why did we hire this person? And then there was a time that I thought that Frontage was the name of the governor of Minnesota, because his name was all over the place, and he would give me directions to go to a remote location, and it would say Frontage Road, so I would take the first frontage road I saw, and I would end up in Wisconsin. And after that, they started sending me with people to remote locations. But even the first day we met, Gil, was very, very amusing, I thought. Anyway, I think you found it rather tragic. I arrived in Minneapolis. I'd never met you before. You were my new news director. And I had, knowing the guys at the airport in Fort Myers, which was my last job, convinced them to basically take every single one of my worldly possessions and put them on the plane with me without charging me extra baggage, because I was always doing stories at the airport. So you arrived at the airport to pick me up, and I met you, and we took one bag, and you said, "Is that it?" I said, "No, there's a little more, Mr. Amundson. We have a few more bags." Well, about 45 more bags arrived. Like, too many to fit in your car, and then you got into a fight with a porter who accused you of like, ripping him off and not tipping him enough, and it was a very not a great way to start a new job, that's for sure. Let's see. There was a time I almost killed Mad Dog Ted Kavanaugh because basically I didn't know how to drive, especially in a cold climate, because I used to have an MG Midget with a top down in Florida, and then I got this American car, and the car got foggy when it was snowing out. I mean, when it was cold out, which it always was in Minneapolis, the whole thing like fogged over, and I didn't know about defrost or anything like that. So Mad Dog Ted asked me for a ride home, and we were driving along the freeway at high rates of speed, not seeing anything because we were totally fogged in, and I did almost kill both of us. So that was also another amusing little anecdote. There was a time that you sent me to Berlin. I still don't know why you sent me to Berlin, but you did for a month, and I had a great time, and I must thank you for that. That's one of the most memorable vacations of my life, paid vacations of my life. And we were at the Tempelhof Airport where the Berlin airlift during World War II was conducted. And I was with that photographer who's probably still there. Hi, how are you? Babs, right? And she shot one take of my stand-up, which I didn't like, and we got into an argument over whether or not I could shoot a second tape. And then we ended up calling you from Berlin and waking you up at home and arguing with you over the phone. I'm sorry, nobody else will find this amusing, but it was very funny at the time. So Babs and I ended up being real close, and at the end of all that, but that was a lot of fun. Berlin was a blast, I got to tell you. Let's see, any other funny stories? Oh, well, there was a story of Quiet and I who were coming back from a story, and he cut somebody off. These two guys turned out to be mafiosos or some sort of organized crime figures who then cut us off and basically tried to kill us until Quiet pretended that he was a karate expert and started doing all sorts of fake karate moves and scared both of these men off. And I was on the radio screaming for help, but they kept asking us where we were, and I didn't know where we were. I said somewhere in the snow in Minnesota. And so that was also quite an interesting evening. What are the call letters of the station? It keeps changing. I don't know what to call you anymore. But anyway, I hear you're a great success now. As for me, very briefly, after I left you, I went to Philadelphia for a couple of years. And then I went to New York, my hometown. And I was there for 8 years. And I had a lot of fun reporting on the lovely streets of the city of New York. And now I am here in Los Angeles at KCAL-TV, which is a Disney-owned operation, and 3 hours of primetime news, which is going to be very exciting. So that's probably all you want to know about me. I'm married. Oh, I am married. Michael Horowitz, a TV producer. And I still see Jim Gately occasionally on feeds from Washington, D.C. That always gives me a jolt. And no, it's always a pleasure to see him. No, it is. It really is. Let's see. What else? Gil, all I can say in all seriousness is that when I think back on all the news directors I have worked for, and believe me, they are a lot, certainly more than the 12 years I've spent in this business. I think it's like 24 or something. You will always stand out as one of the sweetest people, a truly kind person who was generally and exclusively a benevolent person. I would say a benevolent dictator, but you weren't even a dictator. You were too nice for that. You were just a nice, and I'm sure are a nice person. And have a great time. Come out here and visit me and stay at my house. I don't even have a house, but you could stay at my rental apartment or whatever. You can share the beach with me. We'll hang out at the beach. We'll pitch a tent. Okay, bye-bye. Good luck.
Gil saw the television station through a lot of good times and a lot of bad times. Losing him is one of those bad times. Sorry to see you go, Gil, but good luck.
Gil, you'll now have the time to do what you want to do. That's a privilege earned the hard way over a long course of time. So good luck and enjoy, and remember, to live in hearts we leave behind is not to die. This is water.